People, this is Alice and you're in Gothic land, and this is very strange. I've been trying to set my live video on my computer, but I'm doing it with my mobile phone, which is not the idea that I had in mind. So what I'll do is to continue this way. I'm sorry, I'm on my phone, it's not ideal, but hey, we're here, that's the important thing. So right, welcome to Alice in Gothic Land, a place where I help you with your communication skills through the Gothic. We are looking into defining what the Gothic is. We are looking into how to connect that with your everyday life problems. How is the Gothic important in when you're entertaining yourself, watching it, what can you learn from it? And we are starting by setting up some basis, some foundations on what is the Gothic. Yesterday we actually looked at 3 different points. Okay, so I'm just going to very quickly summarize what those 3 points were. I'm just going to change this way. I hope that you can hear me, because on my phone is not the same as with my microphone. I hope I'm not getting in the way of my sound. So yesterday we saw 3 points. We saw definitions of the Gothic, what that means in terms of architecture, of literature, of language, even the Germanic tribes going back in the past, even the music, the aesthetics. We looked also at the origins of Gothic literature to see where it started, what are the main things that, or the main books and main works that make decide when the Gothic started. And we also saw a little bit about what happened in the Spanish arena, which is something that for me is very interesting, because being a Spaniard, I always found very interesting to find out the correlation, and why don't we study Gothic in Spain, for example, like they do in the UK. For me, that's always been a puzzle. I'm still wondering why there are so many little groups working on the Gothic the same way that is happening in England, or even in the States. There are countries that they are now doing and working on the Gothic, and they've been doing for some time, but not in Spain, not the same way. I know that there are groups, and I don't want to be saying something that is not right, but it's not a thing that, it's not something that is well or done in the same way. It's not that it's not well done, it's just done differently. Sorry, I'm a bit disturbed with this fact of not being in my computer, and I don't know if I'm looking at the right people, and I want to see my viewers. I don't have viewers yet, so well, anyway, let's go back to this. See if there are any comments. You might have to raise your hand, and I probably will see if there's anybody on the chat as well. I can write comments. Okay, let's see. This is a new thing, so just bear with me. I'm new at this these live events. Okay, so the 3rd point was the difficulty to describe the Gothic. Why do we find that difficulty? And we went through this aspect of uncertainty that the Gothic creates, and all this what derives from that. Right, so for today, what I want to talk about is going back to the misconceptions of the Gothic. I'm going to take you through the different periods of time, so then you can see more or less what happened in every period and the names. But I'm not going to entertain myself too much, because the idea is not to give you a lot of, hey, I've got Ivana here, hello, everything's fine. This is crazy. My computer wasn't working. You might have seen me swearing and all sorts, so I apologize for that, because it was set up yesterday very well, and today is not, but okay. Thank you for being here and for being patient. Right, so as I was saying, yesterday we saw the 3 points. Today we're going to see again 3 points. These points between yesterday and today, what I'm trying to do is set up some foundations. So you will then, as we move on with the Gothic, you will see that how nowadays this Gothic is seen, how it applies, where can we see it in the cinema, how can we see the evolution, what we have inherited from the original Gothic to nowadays. So I'm not trying to do an academic course, it's just brief introduction, brief knowledge for people who are not very familiarized, and maybe if you are familiarized, it might help you to revise certain concepts. So Today again, we're going to do 3 points, and the first thing is I'm going to talk to you about the different periods. I'm going to try to compare a little bit with the Spanish arena. The second point is I'm going to tell you what do we learn from knowing about this period, and then the benefits that you can start benefiting from now, from today. What are the good things about the learning about the Gothic, right? So because of these misconceptions, one of the first things that you think of, and certainly that's one of the first things I thought of when I thought about the Gothic without having a lot of information, was my direct connection was monsters, the supernatural. Since I'm passionate about ghosts, the Gothic offered me this dialogue and this conversation about the ghost and what happened in the afterlife, if there's any afterlife, all the psychological things that go around these as well. Accepting, for me, death is a big thing. People accept death in different ways. I do not really accept disappearing, so I keep looking for solutions and I keep looking for alternatives to disappearing completely. So the Gothic allows me to go there. It allows me to talk about it. It allows me to talk about grief, about bereavement, and I feel better with myself and I'm learning things, so it can't be that bad. So if you think about that, okay, the Gothic is not just about the supernatural, and I know that, we said that yesterday too, but also it's about identity, it's about a lot of other things. But why do I like the supernatural? Why do we connect the Gothic with the supernatural? It's because going back in time, when we started telling stories around the campfires, we started telling ghost stories. So the ghost, fears, the unknown has always been there, and that is the most obvious or the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about the Gothic. And everything else seems to derive from that initial point. There might be some academics discussing or not agreeing with that, but pretty much I think it goes our way. So let's move on to the different periods. Now, it would be fantastic if I could now have a presentation, like a PowerPoint presentation, where I could actually tell you about the periods and you could look at them and you could visually, it would be nicer. But for now, just have an idea, and I'll slow down a little bit. So there is a first pre-Gothic period that goes from the 1721 to 1763, and that's what we mentioned yesterday. We mentioned the graveyard poets, that if you remember, I'm not going to give you names here because they're not so famous, maybe in Spain. In England, for people who actually work in depth, or they've been working in depth with the graveyard poets, the names will be relevant. But I think for us right now, it's not something that we should worry about too much, because the names that you're going to see there are not as famous or as common as others that you're going to listen to in a moment. Then the second part, or the second period, will be the beginning of the Gothic, or some people call that the early Gothic, which will be between 1764 and 1788. And here is where we have Horace Walpole and the Castle of Otranto that we mentioned yesterday. The third period, also called High Gothic, goes from 1789 to 1813. And here we have now names that start ringing a bell. We have Anne Radcliffe, we have Matthew Gregory Lewis, we have in the Spanish arena, Xavier Aldana Reyes. He talks about Vicente Martínez Colomer, who wrote El Valdemaro. So we start having already in Spain some work that is considered Gothic. Before that, we had translations in Spain. That's why, even though more or less it happened simultaneously, for us it happened a lot later, because in Spain we had the Inquisition, and later on we had a civil war that actually created a different scenario for the Gothic. The fourth period, or late Gothic, goes from 1814 to 1836, and here's where we find our Jane Austen, Mary Shelley, Charles Maturin, who closed the Gothic period, this fourth period, and we have other names as well, but those are like the ones that you're going to be familiarized the most, or you more familiarized with. Then we have the Victorian Gothic, that, as the name says, is the period of Queen Victoria when she was on the throne. So that goes from the 20th of June 1837 to when she died, the 22nd of January 1901. What do we find here? We find here Penny Dreadfuls, Edgar Allan Poe, we've got the Brontes, we've got Charles Dickens, we've got Oscar Wilde, we've got Bram Stoker. Yeah, the Victorian period is the period that we've got more and more creators, and is where we have like a peak. And this is the period where that people tend to think of when we mention the Gothic. We also have in Spain, we have Gustavo Adolfo Bécquer, even though you might think that that's a weird one, but we have that as well. And Espronceda as some of the names. They're not the only ones, but the most famous names. And then you're going to start thinking, well, I was never taught in school, mainly for Spanish speakers, I was never taught that Bécquer was Gothic. No. But then when you look at this Golondrinas poem, then you're going to see the swallows, yeah? You're going to see that there's a lot of dark vocabulary and dark settings, and there's some tropes going on there that are typically Gothic. We will talk about the literary devices in another live session, so then you become more familiarized with what I'm talking about. The next stage is modern Gothic that goes, and here I have some doubts because there are different researchers. It's difficult to put the certain borders, it's not like a clear division because things overlap over time as well. So here we have in the modern Gothic goes between the 1900 and 1945. And as an example, we have Daphne du Maurier with Rebecca. Then we have this period that goes called the post-war Gothic, that is between 1945 and 1950s, and this is very important. And I think this is already going to be giving you ideas of what was happening at that time and why do we have post-war Gothic. Here we find not so much as Gothic things, Gothic works, but we have books with or stories with Gothic elements. This is the case of George Orwell's dystopias and fantasies with dark elements. Yeah, we have 1984. We have the Animal Farm. So they're dystopias, but they have these Gothic elements, and they're very dark, and they touch human feelings and human all these contacts and relationships, and it puts you in, his stories put you in situations that are really uncomfortable. So all these dark elements that we don't quite know where things are going to end. So this is again in the Gothic arena. And then there's something less known, but that maybe for English people it's more common. Mervyn Peake with his Gothic Gormengash trilogy, Titus Grown. So there's this period of post-war that you will see that it's not just in the UK or in England. I keep saying the UK and England, I keep flicking, and so I apologize for that. You will see that because we have a war context, you will see some countries that are going to start speaking about the English. The colonies are going to start speaking back, and we're going to have Gothic production because of that. So we don't just have the spotlight has moved from the English observing everything around them, and everything that is not them is the other. So we have this element of otherness in the Gothic that's very characteristic. So everything that is not English is other, is strange, is something that is threatening, so I'm scared. But after the wars, the colonies and the colonizers and people who were invaded by the English started speaking back also in this Gothic terminology, and also the other was speaking back, and this is what we starting to get as well. After this post-war Gothic, between the 1950s, from even our days. We have this postmodern Gothic, postmodern Gothic. We have examples like, for example, Angela Carter, but in the Spanish and the Catalan arena, we have Mercè Rodoreda, we have Emilia Pardo Bazán. So, no, Emilia Pardo Bazán is more from the, she's more in the Victorian period. But what we have is like modern writers that we don't familiarize with the Gothic. We have Nada, Carmen Laforet in the Spanish arena. And we have this postmodern Gothic that somehow is moved on and is still relevant to our days. Probably from the pandemic, we're going to start getting a different name. Probably there are going to be different subdivisions in this postmodern Gothic, because a lot of things have happened between the 50s and now. So there's been a lot of production, and certainly in the last years, and certainly in the last pandemic 2 years, there's been a boom on Gothic writing, on horror, and that's due to the situation, the historical moment that we live in. Now, this is a clue for the next point, for point 2. It's connected to this, what do we learn from knowing about these periods? Because you're going to think, well, you're going to talk to us about modern life, about modern times, or what are you doing here? We need that to actually understand what happens afterwards. So what do we learn from this period? We're learning about historical timelines and movements in religion, ideologies, political movements. We've seen wars, we've seen the roles of people. So what was happening historically at that time? When Frankenstein was written, we had the Napoleonic Wars in France, and that had an impact in Mary Shelley's writing as well. So everything is connected, and even though at that time countries were not so much in contact globally like we are now, thanks to internet and social media and all this, it was a time where the news went from country to country, and people knew what was happening in the neighboring countries. So this created anxieties and created other worries that then were translated and transported to the written texts. So we learn history. We also learn about the literary influences that influence the writers of each period, and part of that is what we have inherited. So that will explain how we see things in a certain way and not in another way, but not just only from our country and our own point of view. Also, we're learning about other points of view. So these multiple views, these multiple Gothic points of view is what still is now making the Gothic change, taking a lot of more different characteristics and aspects, even though at the core and the essence of it, we still have some things that we saw already in the origins. The third point that we have in what we learn from knowing about the periods is the cultural and the social characteristics. So the social classes, what was happening in the high classes, what was happening in the lower classes. Think about Dickens. Dickens criticized very much the poor, and he criticized the social status that a lot of people were living in, that were suffering. You know, those really closed factories with really bad health or non-existent health services and care. The kids and oh, hello Raquel, how are you? Another cousin, family connection today. Also the you think about Charles Dickens. He wrote Oliver Twist, and Oliver Twist is a criticism of the moment, that period of time where the kids were used as labor and they were used and exploited. So that is something that is very latent still nowadays from Victorian times, and that's why a lot of people still think of Victorian times as something, oh, she's gone. Victorian times as something, a period that is very interesting because it's got these visually ostentatious moments in social classes, but at the same time the very dark side of the society is that it's very dark, and they were hiding a lot of dirt, if we can say it like that. Okay, so that's for literary influences. For cultural, no, sorry, that was the social classes. For the medical and scientific advances, we also have that with Frankenstein, for example. We learn about things that we didn't know before. Is the beginning of our modern science. So for scientists, this is something very interesting. We start learning about Calvinism. Mary Shelley uses the science and the worries about science at the time. She's using them in her book. And that book is the beginning of science fiction, but it's also a very Gothic book, Frankenstein I'm talking about, right? So we learn a lot of things from these periods, from historically, literally, culturally, and even in science department. We're learning a lot of things by looking at the different periods and what was going on and what were the worries of the people at that time. Okay, so I hope you're following so far. We're going to move now to point 3, and with this we're going to close up for today's event. So how can this benefit you now? The Gothic, as you can see, probably you are already grasping this, that it is the only text that allows you to talk about taboo topics, what is uncomfortable, what is liminal, what other texts don't go to. So this is something that attracts a variety of people and attracts a lot of people with traumas, with social disclosure, with worries, fears, mainly fears. And it's a very good place for conversation and for dialogue between people. So how does that benefit you? On the one hand, I'm going to give you 8 points. On the one hand, it broadens your conversation with others by knowing about historical backgrounds and what was going on in literary spaces. You're going to be able to have more conversations with different people because you're going to have extra knowledge. The second thing, or the second advantage, is that you're going to be able to apply to certain jobs that you wouldn't be able to apply otherwise. And that's whether it's in the writing arena, in the speaking arena, or even in cross-cultural studies. If you want to dedicate your life to studying cross-culturally and to take into account different cultures and points of view, this is great. The Gothic allows you to do that. Also, and connected to this, is developing your critical mind. You develop your critical mind, then again, that is one of the main characteristics, or one of the characteristics or the aspects that they look for when you're looking for a job nowadays. So it's a very critical point, and critical thinking happens in the Gothic. Is kind of basic, the thing that happens in the Gothic. The fourth point is that you become aware of the language. When we're reading, we're not just learning about culture, we are definitely learning about language. If you're reading in English because this is your second language, or because you're studying it, by reading the texts in original version and in English, you're going to see the vocabulary that you're not going to see when you're speaking, for example. But you're also going to have a broader glossary of vocabulary connected to specific things. Is going to be connected to specific expressions, idioms that happened at that time, that period of time, and then maybe nowadays it has changed because we're not using that certain tools or certain ways anymore, but the expression still prevails. And if we don't understand what colloquialism is or an idiom is by reading other types of texts, then you're going to get it with the Gothic. Some of these things apply to any type of writing and to any literature that might be historical or non-fiction or other type of fiction as well. But with the Gothic, it's a lot more accentuated. Some of these things are more accentuated. Then, obviously, by reading certain texts with certain complexity, not just of the vocabulary, but also the ideas, you are actually going more in depth into the text. So you're doing a lot more, your comprehension levels are higher. So you're working on parts of your brain that you will normally not work. You would normally not be working on if you were reading maybe some type of news or something a little bit less intense, that will require less of an exercise and an attention from your side. So you go to a deeper level of understanding of the text. But also by going deeper, this is where Alice in Wonderland comes, or Alice in Gothic Land comes, is that you go deeper in the text, and then that's how you start understanding more, and that's how you enjoy more what you're reading. So then is when learning really happens. You enjoy it, you learn. If you don't enjoy it, you don't learn, because you're reading but nothing's going in. When we understand and we engage, then the next wonderful thing that happens is that we empathize with characters. By empathizing, we're putting ourselves in other people's shoes, and then they might be able to give us solutions, but also to see maybe that other people around us in our everyday lives might be going through similar things, and therefore we are learning that maybe what our actions are or what we are doing at the moment is not right, or maybe we understand why some people do not accept our actions or what we say. So it also triggers curiosity. Yeah, if we empathize, we engage with the text or with the films, then we get our curiosity triggers again, and then we get motivated, and we're motivated, we keep learning. So benefit, benefit, benefit. At a cognitive level, then we are making more connections. So neurologically, our brain is working harder. We also develop our memory skills, because we're going to be learning new vocabulary and trying to remember names, dates, and, you know, mainly when we're looking into the historical background of things. But there are lots of other benefits that you will find out as we go on with this series of live events, okay? Right, so basically, to wrap up, today we've seen different periods of the Gothic in England, and I've compared them a little bit with the Spanish arena. What we learn from knowing about the periods, why is this important when we talk about our present day, how this benefits us in our jobs, even if this is entertainment. Well, in entertainment you can find solution to your daily problems too. And what I want to do to finish off today is to remind you that if you want to keep looking into this, you want to already know everything I'm doing, go to my website, go to gothicalice.com and download my free PDF, Down the Rabbit Hole. There you're going to have 6 points of critical thinking, how to start putting your critical thinking in place, which we have been talking about today, how to start using it in your everyday life, how to identify the 6 elements, how to ask these questions and why they are important. Then we're going to teach you the 5 communication skills that you can start applying now, whether you're using English as a second language or in your mother tongue. A lot of things from the second language also apply to your mother tongue. And also the last 5 aspects are how to use the Gothic in our present day. So it's a very easy, readable, downloadable, that you can actually start working on these elements if you like the Gothic and you would like to see how it can actually be useful for your everyday lives. Okay, so I hope you have enjoyed it. If anybody has comments, now is the time. You could ask questions, or you could just point out anything that maybe I've missed or that you would like me to talk about in the next days. What I will be doing is to keep going down. We've started from the bigger picture, and slowly, we're going to be going down to the more specific problems. So in the next days, we're going to be talking about the difference between horror, the Gothic, and fear, terror. We're going to be talking as well about, in our modern times, what we understand for monsters, what is a monster, psychological monsters, physical monsters. We're going to be trying to do all this to bring then conversation to films that we're watching nowadays, the current situation that we live in, and you're going to be learning a lot of things and a lot of tools. So if there are no questions, I'll post the PDF here so you can download it now. You could also, if you want to book a session with me, you can also do that, in case you would like to have a chat to see if I can help you with anything regarding your writing or your reading skills or your communication skills in your oral arena. And that's it for me today. I hope that tomorrow I don't make a mess of my live thingy and I can go live on my computer, but this is also fun, so why not? Thanks for being here. I'll see you tomorrow again, my Gothic friends, and leave me your comments and start thinking. I forgot to ask you the question. I want you to think how, I want you to think about this. I want you to think if any of these periods were unknown to you, if you were familiarized or not, have you ever thought about certain writers as being Gothic or this has been a surprise, and also if the Gothic has ever helped you in your everyday life, like you were watching something and you went, oh, I can use that at work tomorrow, for example. Okay, so leave me your comments. You can write in the chat after I've gone, or you can write to me. You go to my website, gothicalice.com, and you will see everything I do there. So I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock CEST. Bye.